Picture yourself standing at the edge of a vast desert, the sun beating down as a line of camels moves slowly along the horizon. For weeks, these travelers have journeyed through some of the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth, carrying precious silks, spices, and knowledge across continents. And just when exhaustion threatens to overwhelm them, a magnificent stone structure emerges in the distance, a Caravanserai. This wasn't just a place to rest. It was a sanctuary where worlds collided, where languages blended, and where the very fabric of human civilization was woven together, thread by thread. These Caravansarais, whose name comes from the Persian words for caravan and palace, were the beating heart of the Silk Road, and their legacy is woven into our lives in ways we're only beginning to understand. Think about the last time you stayed in a hotel, shared a meal with someone from another culture, or even used a concept like the number 0. It's easy to take these things for granted, but each one carries echoes of those ancient way stations where East met West, not in conflict, but in collaboration. Within those walls, merchants from China negotiated with traders from Persia. Scholars debated under the same stars that guided them from Baghdad to Beijing. And in the quiet moments between journeys, stories, recipes, and ideas were exchanged ingredients that would eventually season the entire course of human history. This was where globalization truly began, not in boardrooms or on the internet, but in dusty courtyards under open skies, where trust was the only currency that mattered. In this video, we're going to step inside these extraordinary spaces and uncover how they shaped everything from economics and architecture to diplomacy and daily life. We'll explore how a simple stop for the night could change the course of science, spark new artistic movements, and even help prevent wars. And perhaps most importantly, we'll discover why the spirit of the Caravanserai, that beautiful, fragile ideal of open exchange and mutual respect, is more relevant today than ever. So come along with us on a journey through time, along the winding paths of the Silk Road, to rediscover these forgotten palaces of connection and understand how they helped build the world we share today. A weary caravan laden with treasures and caked in the dust of 1,000 miles would first spot the silhouette of a caravanserai against the horizon, a sight that meant survival. These were not mere buildings, they were fortresses of hospitality, strategically placed a day's journey apart, which could be 30 kilometers or more depending on the terrain. The very word Caravanserai tells its own story, a combination of the Persian karvan meaning caravan and sarai meaning palace or government building. So a palace for caravans, and that's exactly what they were designed to be. Imagine the relief of a traveler arriving after a brutal day crossing a salt flat or navigating a mountain pass. The heavy gates, often the only opening in a high, defensive wall, would swing shut behind them, sealing out the dangers of the outside world, be they bandits, sandstorms, or simply the profound isolation of the wilderness. Inside, a sprawling courtyard awaited, buzzing with an energy that must have felt like arriving in a miniature city. The design was brilliantly standardized yet adaptable. At the center of it all was a large, open courtyard. This was the beating heart of the Caravanserai, a multi-purpose space where camels and other pack animals were unloaded, fed, and watered from a central trough or cistern. Surrounding this courtyard were arched arcades that provided shade and shelter. Behind these arches lay a series of identical, sparsely furnished rooms where travelers could sleep and store their goods. The animals were typically housed in stables that lined the outer walls, keeping them secure. This layout wasn't accidental. It was a masterclass in functional design that prioritized security, community, and efficiency. Everything a traveler or their animals needed was within this enclosed complex, a self-contained ecosystem of rest and resupply. But to see caravanserais as just fancy motels is to miss their true, world-altering significance. As the historian Janet Abu-Lughod so eloquently argued, these were the original melting pots, the social hubs where globalization was quietly invented. Within those secure walls, a silk merchant from China could find themselves sharing a fire and a meal with a glassblower from Venice, while a scholar from Baghdad debated astronomy with a monk from Constantinople. They might not have shared a common language at first, but they shared a journey, and that shared experience forged bonds of necessity and curiosity. Deals were brokered using a mix of hand gestures and trusted interpreters. News from distant empires was exchanged alongside goods. A new musical instrument from one region might be played for a captivated audience from another. This was where cultures didn't just pass by each other. They sat down, interacted, and blended. This function as a neutral ground for exchange was the absolute bedrock of the Silk Road's success. By drastically reducing the immense risks and physical hardships of long-distance travel, Caravansaris made the continuous flow of commerce not just possible, but profitable. They were the vital infrastructure that supported the entire network, the nodes that connected the lines on the map. They enabled the steady movement of not only luxury items like silk, spices, and gems, but also of something far more precious and durable: knowledge. The innovations, religious ideas, and artistic styles that flowed along these routes often found their first audiences within the safety of these way stations. In this way, the humble Caravanserai did more than shelter people. It helped weave the separate threads of human civilization into the interconnected tapestry we know today, laying a foundation for our modern world of exchange and dialogue. Beyond their formidable walls, the true genius of Caravanserai architecture lay in its masterful blend of universal function and local artistry. While the core layout remained remarkably consistent across thousands of miles, a secure, square or rectangular footprint with a single fortified gate, a central courtyard, and surrounding arcades housing rooms and stables, the execution was anything but generic. Builders were brilliant adapters, using locally sourced materials and regional decorative traditions to create structures that felt both familiar to a traveler from another continent and uniquely rooted in their specific location. In the arid plains of Persia, you might find a caravanserai constructed from sun-dried brick, its facade adorned with intricate glazed tilework depicting geometric patterns and floral motifs, a testament to Islamic artistic principles. Travel further into the mountainous regions of Anatolia, and the same functional layout would be executed in sturdy, precisely cut stone, perhaps with Seljuk-inspired carvings around the gateways. This wasn't just about aesthetics, it was a profound statement about identity and integration. A caravanserai had to serve a universal human need for shelter, while respectfully belonging to the land and culture in which it was placed. This architectural diplomacy, this ability to be both a local landmark and a node in a global network, is what made these structures so enduring. The innovations within these walls were solutions born of sheer necessity, addressing the brutal challenges of remote travel with astonishing cleverness. Water, the most precious commodity in the desert, was managed with sophisticated systems. Large underground cisterns were engineered to collect and store seasonal rainwater, keeping it cool and safe from evaporation for months. Elaborate ventilation shafts, known as badgers or wind catchers, would rise from the living quarters, cleverly funneling even the faintest breeze down into the rooms below to provide a life-saving respite from the stifling heat. For defense, the design was equally intelligent. The single, heavy gate was often the only break in the outer wall, making the structure easy to defend from bandits. Watchtowers positioned at the corners provided clear sight lines across the empty landscape, and the entire complex was designed as a single, defensible unit. Every architectural choice, from the thickness of the walls to the placement of the animal stables, was a direct response to the dual threats of a harsh environment and human danger, creating oases of security in a world of uncertainty. This harmonious relationship with the environment is what scholars like Bernard O'Kane point to as a key part of the Caravanserais' legacy. They were not brute forces imposed upon the landscape, but thoughtful extensions of it. The use of local stone or brick meant they blended into the colors of the surrounding earth. Their orientation often took advantage of natural wind patterns for cooling and sunlight for warmth. In many ways, they were early exemplars of sustainable architecture, built to last for centuries with a minimal ecological footprint because they had to be. There were no supply chains to deliver replacement materials from afar. This symbiosis between ambition and adaptation is a powerful theme that echoes far beyond their original purpose. The Caravansarai stands as a symbol of how human ingenuity can create spaces of comfort and connection without conquering the natural world, but by working intelligently within its rules. This architectural brilliance did more than just shelter bodies. It created the perfect physical conditions for something far more important to flourish: the spontaneous and profound human connections that would define the Silk Road. As dusk settled over the desert and the great gates of the Caravanserai swung shut, the true magic of these spaces began to unfold. The practical business of unloading goods and tending to animals gave way to something far more profound. Around cooking fires and in the dimly lit arcades, a remarkable transformation occurred. The dusty traveler from Venice became a storyteller, the merchant from Samarkand a philosopher, and the monk from India a teacher. These were not just places to rest, they were vibrant, living forums where the world's knowledge was unpacked alongside its goods. In an age long before the internet or international conferences, the Caravanserai served as the primary engine for the cross-pollination of ideas, a neutral ground where the most valuable cargo was not what was carried on camels, but what was carried in minds. Imagine the scene: a Persian scholar, having carefully protected a precious manuscript on astronomy throughout his journey, might find himself in deep conversation with a Chinese official fascinated by the movements of the stars. Using a mixture of broken phrases, drawn diagrams in the sand, and the help of a multilingual translator, they would compare their different celestial maps and calculations. The Persian might explain the sophisticated astrolabe, a device for navigation and timekeeping, while the Chinese traveler could share their own detailed records of comet sightings. In these interactions, knowledge wasn't just transferred, it was refined, challenged, and often improved. A medical technique from India, perhaps a specific surgical procedure described in an ancient Ayurvedic text, might be demonstrated to a healer from the Byzantine Empire, who would in turn share a new herbal remedy. This was innovation in its purest form, driven by practical need, curiosity, and the unique collision of different ways of seeing the world. The transmission of major religious and philosophical systems owes a great debt to these informal hubs. A Buddhist monk traveling from a monastery in India toward the courts of China would have relied on the shelter of Caravansarais for months. Within their walls, he wouldn't just rest, he would teach. He might chant sutras for a curious audience, explain the concept of karma to a group of Zoroastrian merchants, or even debate theology with a Nestorian Christian priest heading in the opposite direction. These were not always easy conversations, but the necessity of coexistence within the Caravanserai fostered a pragmatic tolerance. People of different faiths often shared prayer spaces at different times or simply observed each other's rituals with a respectful curiosity. This daily exposure to diversity, as historian Peter Frankopan suggests, created a baseline of multicultural understanding that was essential for the peaceful movement of people and ideas across continents. It was in these settings that the foundational texts of Buddhism slowly made their way eastward, were translated, and eventually took root in entirely new cultures, forever altered by the journey and the conversations along the way. This environment also acted as a powerful incubator for language itself. The constant buzz of dozens of different tongues, Sogdian, Arabic, Persian, Turkish, Chinese, Greek, created a pressing need for a common way to communicate. From this linguistic chaos, simplified trading languages or pidgins naturally emerged. These were practical tools stripped of complex grammar, built on a core vocabulary that everyone could understand. Over time, some of these pidgins evolved into more stable lingua francas, with Persian often serving as a common language of trade and diplomacy across vast stretches of the Silk Road. This linguistic innovation was about more than just commerce. It was the first step toward a shared identity. It allowed for jokes to be told, friendships to be formed, and trust to be built between people who, under any other circumstances, would have remained complete strangers. The Caravanserai, therefore, didn't just facilitate the exchange of existing ideas. It actively generated new tools for human connection, proving that the most enduring legacy of any journey is often the understanding forged between fellow travelers. The courtyard of a bustling caravanserai would have been a sensory overload in the best possible way, a vibrant, chaotic, and incredibly productive marketplace under the open sky. Picture the scene as camels knelt with weary groans, their burdens finally lifted. Bales of exquisite Chinese silk, softer than cloud and dyed in colors that seemed to capture the sunset itself, were unrolled for inspection by Persian merchants. Nearby, sacks spilled open to reveal the aromatic treasures of India, peppercorns, cinnamon, and cardamom that filled the air with their pungent, exotic scent. A trader from the Roman Empire might carefully unpack delicate glassware, holding a vase up to the light to showcase its clarity to a circle of impressed onlookers from Central Asia. This was more than just commerce. It was a theater of global connection where the material wealth of entire civilizations was laid bare, examined, and exchanged. But the true genius of this system was that the trade in spices and textiles was merely the visible surface of a much deeper, more profound exchange. These material goods acted as the vessels, the conversation starters, and the currency for trading something far more transformative, ideas. While silk and spices were carried in saddlebags, the most revolutionary concepts traveled in the minds of the people who stopped there. Consider the seemingly simple idea of a number representing nothing, the concept of zero. It originated in ancient India, a profound philosophical and mathematical breakthrough, but it couldn't travel on its own. It was carried westward by scholars and merchants, debated and explained on scraps of paper or drawn in the dust of a caravanserai courtyard. A mathematician from Baghdad might have first encountered the idea not in a formal academy, but from an Indian trader resting after the long journey through the Hindu Kush. These way stations became the critical relay points where such abstract knowledge was passed from one intellectual tradition to another, refined through discussion, and then disseminated further along the route. Similarly, the rich oral storytelling traditions that would centuries later be compiled as the Arabian Nights didn't spread in bound books. They traveled on the lips of storytellers who would captivate diverse audiences huddled together for warmth at night, adapting tales of jennies and flying carpets for listeners from different cultures, ensuring their survival and evolution. This constant intermingling didn't just transfer ideas in their original form, it frequently sparked entirely new hybrid innovations. As economic historian Valerie Hansen has illustrated, the Caravanserai was a petri dish for cultural synthesis. Chinese artisans had mastered the art of porcelain, creating stunningly delicate and strong ceramics. Persian artists, meanwhile, had developed spectacular cobalt blue glazes and intricate figurative painting. When these traditions met in the cultural exchange zones of the Silk Road, the result was Sino-Islamic ceramic where Chinese-style plates and vases adorned with distinctly Persian or Islamic designs, which then became wildly popular luxury items across Eurasia. Another powerful example is Greco-Buddhist art. As Buddhism spread north from India into Central Asia, it encountered the artistic influence of the Hellenistic world, a legacy of Alexander the Great's campaigns. In the workshops and markets supported by Caravansaris, sculptors began to depict the Buddha in a classic Greek style, with realistic drapery and Apollo-like features, creating an entirely new artistic genre that would eventually influence how the Buddha was represented all the way to China and Japan. This was innovation born not in isolation but in collaboration. The impact of this dual flow of goods and ideas rippled out to touch every aspect of life, from the highest levels of governance to the most personal daily routines. A new irrigation technology observed in one region could lead to increased agricultural yields in another, supporting larger populations and more complex societies. A legal concept or administrative practice, like an efficient method of tax collection discussed by officials sheltering from a sandstorm, might be adopted and adapted by a distant empire, strengthening its rule. The most enduring changes, however, are often found on the dinner table. The noodles of Central Asia likely traveled west to eventually become pasta, while the sugar refined in India began its journey to sweeten desserts across the continent. Each of these exchanges, both the grand and the humble, was facilitated by the safe, neutral, and diverse environment of the Caravanserai. These structures were the unsung engines of cultural evolution, proving that the most valuable things to ever move along the Silk Road were not the objects that could be weighed on a scale, but the weightless, priceless ideas that changed the world. To truly understand the lifeblood of the Caravanserai, we must step beyond the architecture and into the bustling human drama that animated these stone walls each night. This was a world populated by a remarkable cast of characters, each playing a specialized role in the intricate ballet of long-distance trade. At the center of it all was the merchant, a figure of immense courage and calculation. These were not simple shopkeepers, they were risk-taking entrepreneurs who often invested their entire fortune into a single caravan, gambling that the value of their goods, be it Chinese silk or Roman glass, would multiply enough by the time they reached a distant market to cover the immense costs and dangers of the journey. They had to be masters of negotiation, able to barter with someone whose language they didn't speak, using a complex system of hand gestures, sample goods, and trusted interpreters. Their survival depended on an encyclopedic knowledge of regional tariffs, the quality standards of different cities, and the ever-shifting political winds that could make a trade route safe one season and deadly the next. Just as crucial were the guides and caravan leaders, the unsung heroes who possessed a form of knowledge more valuable than any spice, an intimate understanding of the land. These individuals could read the stars for navigation, identify the faintest animal trails that marked the safest path through a mountain pass, and predict the deadly sandstorms of the desert with an almost supernatural accuracy. They knew where the hidden water sources lay and how to navigate the complex social landscapes of different regions, understanding which local chieftain required a gift for safe passage. A merchant's life and fortune were literally in their hands, and the trust placed in them was absolute. This created a unique bond of respect between the wealthy merchant and the skilled guide, a relationship that often transcended social class and was built on the shared, harrowing experience of the journey. Then there were the local artisans and service providers who set up within or just outside the Caravanserai walls, creating a vibrant, mobile economy of repair and creation. Blacksmiths would skillfully reshoe camels and repair metal fittings on harnesses and weapons. Leather workers would patch worn-out water skins and saddles, while weavers might do quick repairs on torn fabrics or even create new items on demand using local styles that a merchant could sell further down the road. Cooks prepared vast communal meals, often a fusion of ingredients from the travelers' supplies and local produce, creating the first fusion cuisines. These artisans were the essential grease that kept the wheels of commerce turning, ensuring that both people and goods arrived at their next destination in working order. What makes this human ecosystem so extraordinary is how it temporarily flattened the vast social and cultural hierarchies of the outside world. Within the Caravanserai's protective walls, a wealthy Arab silk trader, a Mongolian herder hired as a guard, a Persian scholar, and a Chinese official found themselves on common ground. They shared the same basic needs for food, security, and rest. As anthropologist James Scott has observed, these spaces functioned as micro-societies that operated on shared codes of conduct and mutual respect born from necessity. A universal understanding prevailed that cooperation was the only path to survival and profit. This environment fostered a very early, very practical form of global citizenship. A merchant learned that his word was his bond, and that a reputation for honesty was a currency that could be spent from one end of the Silk Road to the other. The personal relationships and networks of trust forged over shared meals and around nighttime fires were the true infrastructure upon which the Silk Road was built, proving that the most complex systems of exchange ultimately rely on the simplest of human connections, a handshake and a shared belief in a fair deal. By dramatically lowering the barriers to long-distance commerce, Caravansaris didn't just facilitate trade, they fundamentally reshaped the economic landscape of entire continents. Imagine a merchant in the ancient world contemplating a journey from Damascus to Zion. Without the guaranteed shelter, security, and resupply points offered by these way stations, such an undertaking would be a near-suicidal gamble. The risks were astronomical. Bandits could seize an entire cargo, a single sandstorm could wipe out a caravan, and the sheer cost of feeding animals and men across thousands of miles of wilderness could erase any potential profit. Caravansarais systematically dismantled these barriers by providing a predictable and secure place to rest every 30 kilometers or so. They transformed a perilous, uncertain trek into a manageable, calculated business venture. This reliability was the bedrock upon which the Silk Road economy was built. It gave merchants the confidence to plan longer routes, carry more valuable goods, and invest in larger caravans, knowing there was a chain of safe havens waiting for them. The result was a massive expansion in the volume, variety, and geographical reach of trade, connecting markets that had previously existed in isolation and creating the first truly intercontinental economic system. This infrastructure directly fueled the meteoric rise of some of history's most legendary cities. Places like Samarkand, Bukhara, Kashgar, and Constantinople did not become magnificent centers of power and culture by accident. They flourished precisely because they were critical nodes in this network, positioned at the crossroads of major routes where multiple caravans would converge. These cities became giant, permanent versions of the caravanserais themselves, cosmopolitan hubs where goods were not just passed through but were sorted, taxed, sold, and manufactured into new products. The wealth generated was staggering. Taxes on goods moving through these urban centers filled the coffers of empires, funding not only armies and palaces but also vast public works, universities, libraries, and scientific research. As economic historians like Angus Maddison have shown, this period of intensified exchange led to significant periods of economic growth and stability across Eurasia. Regions began to specialize based on their comparative advantage, producing more of what they were best at, whether it was Chinese silk, Indian steel, or Persian carpets, knowing they could reliably trade it for everything else they needed. This efficiency and specialization raised living standards and created an interconnected economic web where prosperity in one region could positively influence another a continent away. The economic benefits were also intensely local. A single caravanserai could transform the fortune of an entire village or oasis community. The taxes and fees paid by merchants for lodging, animal feed, and storage provided a steady stream of revenue for local rulers and chieftains. This money was often reinvested right back into the community, funding the digging of new irrigation canals, the building of local mosques or temples, and the strengthening of regional defenses. The constant arrival of travelers created a bustling local economy for nearby residents. Farmers could sell their fresh produce, fruit, and grain directly to the caravans. Craftsmen found ready buyers for their leatherwork, pottery, and textiles. Guides and guards were hired for the next leg of the journey. This created a powerful virtuous cycle. The Caravansarai brought in wealth, which improved the local area, which in turn made it a more attractive and safer stop, thus bringing in even more trade and wealth. It was a self-reinforcing engine of development that turned barren stretches of desert and mountain into corridors of economic vitality. This robust economic foundation was the essential precondition for everything else that made the Silk Road legendary. The breathtaking cultural exchanges, the transmission of world-changing ideas, the diplomatic dialogues, none of this would have been financially sustainable without the underlying engine of profitable trade. The merchants who carried Buddhist sutras or astronomical charts were first and foremost business people. The profit from their commercial ventures is what paid for their travel and created the opportunity for those intellectual exchanges to happen incidentally. The wealth generated by efficient trade funded the scholars, artists, and architects who then produced the era's great cultural achievements. In this way, the Caravanserai's role as economic catalyst was its most fundamental and enduring legacy. It provided the material means and the stable environment that allowed for the flowering of a connected world, demonstrating that commerce and culture are not opposing forces, but deeply intertwined partners in the story of human progress. This very same environment of secure, predictable interaction also made these way stations the perfect setting for a far more delicate exchange, the diplomacy between empires. Amidst the bustling trade in silks and spices, a far more delicate exchange was often taking place in the quieter corners and private rooms of the Caravanserai, the intricate dance of diplomacy. In an era of sprawling empires and fragile borders, these neutral way stations became the unsung conference rooms of the ancient world. Imagine the scene: emissaries from the Byzantine and Sasanian empires, two powers often locked in brutal conflict, meeting in a caravanserai nestled in the buffer zone of the Armenian highlands. Away from the pomp, pressure, and prying eyes of their respective imperial courts, they could speak more freely. The very act of sharing the same roof, eating the same food, and facing the same travel hardships created a temporary but powerful common ground. This informal atmosphere was crucial for brokering the kind of nuanced agreements that rigid court protocols often stifled. A discussion that might have begun over a shared complaint about the quality of the local bread could gradually, over several days, evolve into a framework for a temporary truce or a mutually beneficial trade concession. The Caravansarais design itself supported this diplomatic function. While the central courtyard was a hive of public activity, many larger way stations featured more private chambers or enclosed meeting spaces off the main arcades. These areas provided the necessary secrecy for sensitive negotiations. Here, envoys could hash out the details of marriage alliances between ruling dynasties, a common tool for securing peace, or debate the precise lines of a disputed border without the immediate threat of armed intimidation. The transient nature of these spaces also offered a built-in excuse for deniability. If a meeting failed or was discovered by hardliners back home, it could be dismissed as an unofficial encounter between travelers, not a formal summit. This flexibility was invaluable for testing the waters of peace without committing to the high-stakes spectacle of an official state visit. History offers glimpses into this vital role. Scholar Christopher Beckwith points to the strategic use of these way stations by powers across Eurasia. Beyond the Byzantine-Sasanian talks, we can envision Mongol officials using caravanserais in Central Asia to receive tribute and pledge loyalty from subject states, or Ottoman envoys meeting with European traders to negotiate safe passage and customs agreements. The success of these interactions often hinged on the unspoken codes of conduct that the caravanserai environment fostered. The universal law of hospitality, sacred to so many of the cultures traveling the Silk Road, meant that even rivals were offered a basic level of protection and respect within those walls. A diplomat was first and foremost a guest. This cultural norm created a thin but vital veneer of civility that could prevent discussions from collapsing into outright hostility. It was in these neutral, in-between places that the tedious, essential work of maintaining an interconnected world took place, proving that commerce and politics were two sides of the same coin, and that the flow of goods was forever tied to the fragile state of peace between empires. After the gates were closed for the night and the bustle of commerce began to quiet, a different kind of activity would often arise within the Caravanserais' walls, one that addressed the needs of the soul as much as the body. In the dimming light, the sounds of trade were gradually replaced by the soft murmur of prayers in a dozen different languages. You might see a group of Muslim merchants unrolling their prayer mats toward Mecca in a quiet corner of the courtyard, while nearby, a Buddhist monk from India sat in silent meditation, his mala beads moving slowly through his fingers. A Nestorian Christian trader from Persia might find a moment of solitude to read from a small, well-worn gospel, while a Zoroastrian from Central Asia offered a quiet prayer before the evening fire. This remarkable scene of simultaneous multi-faith observance wasn't just tolerated, it was a normal, expected part of Caravanserai life, a testament to the pragmatic coexistence that these spaces necessitated and nurtured. The architecture itself often reflected this inclusive approach to spirituality. While not every caravanserai had dedicated religious spaces, many were designed with a thoughtful flexibility to accommodate diverse practices. Some featured small, nondescript side chambers that could serve as a chapel for Christians 1 hour and a prayer room for Muslims the next. Others had simple altars or niches carved into walls where travelers could place small icons or sacred objects from their faith. In regions with a majority population, the design might lean toward one religion, perhaps incorporating a mihrab pointing toward Mecca, but the overarching principle was one of functional accommodation. This wasn't necessarily born of deep theological agreement, but rather a practical understanding that long, dangerous journeys made everyone more aware of their mortality and more eager to observe the rituals that gave them comfort and protection. The shared vulnerability of the road created an unspoken respect for the devotions of others, even if their beliefs were profoundly different. This environment of proximity and tolerance made caravanserais powerful accelerators for the spread of religious ideas across continents. A Buddhist monk traveling the Silk Road from India to China didn't just carry sutras in his luggage, he carried his faith in his daily practice. As he chanted his prayers or explained the Four Noble Truths to curious fellow travelers over a shared meal, he was engaging in the most organic form of missionary work. These informal, personal encounters were often far more effective than formal proselytizing. A merchant impressed by the calm and compassion of a Buddhist monk might be inspired to learn more about his teachings. Similarly, the rhythmic daily prayers of Muslim traders demonstrated the principles of Islam in action, making a powerful impression on those who witnessed their discipline and devotion. The Nestorian Christians, an early Christian sect that spread eastward along the Silk Road, found fertile ground for their teachings in these mobile, diverse communities. The Caravansarai became a relay point where religious ideas were not just transmitted but also translated, both linguistically and culturally, adapting to make sense to new audiences. This constant, close-quarter interaction didn't just spread religions in their pure forms, it often led to fascinating blends and syntheses. As historian Richard Foltz has explored, caravanserais were natural sites of syncretism, where the boundaries between faiths could become beautifully blurred. A traveler might incorporate a gesture from another religion's ritual into their own practice because it felt meaningful. Artistic depictions of divine figures began to show this cross-pollination. Some Buddhist bodhisattvas in Central Asia took on characteristics of Zoroastrian angels, while Christian saints in Persia were sometimes depicted with motifs borrowed from local traditions. Philosophical concepts traveled even more easily. The idea of compassion, central to Buddhism, resonated with the Christian concept of charity and the Islamic emphasis on mercy. Discussions around a caravanserai fire could lead to a Sufi Muslim finding wisdom in a Buddhist parable, or a Confucian scholar appreciating the logical structure of Islamic law. These were not formal theological debates but organic conversations that helped people find common ground in their search for meaning, creating a shared spiritual vocabulary that transcended any single doctrine. This legacy of the Caravanserai as a sanctuary for the soul offers a profound lesson. In a world often divided by religious difference, these spaces stand as a historical example of a multi-faith community that worked. It was a coexistence built not on sweeping agreement, but on shared space, shared journey, and a shared respect for the human need to connect with something greater than oneself. The inner journey of faith and the outer journey of trade were deeply intertwined, each giving meaning and context to the other. The silent prayers offered within those protective walls were for safe travels, fair winds, and good health, universal desires that every traveler, regardless of creed, could understand and support. This spiritual ecosystem, where diverse practices could not only coexist but cross-fertilize and enrich each other, created a foundation of mutual respect that was absolutely essential for the other, more tangible forms of exchange that defined the Silk Road, paving the way for an even more precious cargo to move freely across the world: knowledge. While merchants haggled over the weight of spices and the quality of silk in the courtyard, a quieter yet equally profound transaction was often taking place in the shaded arcades nearby. Here, scholars and scribes who had braved the same treacherous roads as the traders would unpack their most precious and fragile cargo, knowledge. These men were the librarians of the open road, their minds and satchels filled with manuscripts on medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy. The Caravanserai, with its forced pauses and diverse inhabitants, became an impromptu university, a place where the intellectual treasures of entire civilizations could be compared, debated, and most importantly, translated. A Greek medical text preserved in a Byzantine monastery might be studied by a Persian physician who could add his own insights from Avicenna's canon of medicine before the work was carefully translated into Arabic and then copied for a scholar heading east to India. This process of continuous annotation and translation within the safety of these way stations ensured that knowledge wasn't just preserved in a static form. It was actively improved and adapted as it moved across the world. The sheer logistical challenge of moving knowledge in the ancient world is hard to overstate. Books were not lightweight commodities. They were heavy, hand-copied manuscripts on parchment or papyrus, incredibly valuable and incredibly vulnerable to the elements, to thieves, and to simple decay. A caravanserai offered a unique solution to this problem. It was a place where these fragile items could be unpacked, aired out, and repaired. More importantly, it was a place where they could be replicated. Scribes traveling with caravans would set up temporary scriptoriums, working by lamplight to create new copies of texts. This was how ideas achieved immortality. A single copy of a groundbreaking work on algebra could be reproduced a dozen times in a single stop, with each new copy then traveling off in a different direction, vastly increasing its chances of survival and its spread. The Caravansarai, therefore, functioned as a critical node in a vast, decentralized library system, ensuring that the loss of a single text in a storm or to bandits did not mean the permanent loss of the knowledge it contained. Perhaps the most famous example of this process is the transmission of classical Greek knowledge. The works of philosophers like Aristotle, Plato, and scientists like Galen and Ptolemy were largely lost to Western Europe after the fall of Rome. But they were meticulously preserved and studied in the Byzantine Empire and, crucially, in the scholarly centers of the Islamic world. How did they get there? A significant portion of that journey happened in caravanserais. Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scholars, often funded by wealthy patrons or rulers hungry for knowledge, would meet in these neutral zones. They would pool their linguistic skills. A scholar fluent in Greek and Syriac might work with another expert in Syriac and Arabic to undertake the monumental task of translation. This wasn't a dry, word-for-word exercise. It was a dynamic intellectual collaboration. As they translated, they would debate, clarify, and often expand upon the original Greek concepts, adding commentary and new discoveries. This collective effort, happening in dozens of way stations over centuries, ensured that the legacy of Greece was not merely stored away, but was actively injected into the intellectual bloodstream of the Islamic Golden Age, where it fueled breathtaking advances in everything from optics to medicine. The exchange was never just one way. While Greek ideas flowed east, innovations from India and China were moving west through the very same channels. The sophisticated decimal system and the concept of zero, which had been developed by Indian mathematicians, were likely explained and demonstrated on caravanserai floors using temporary diagrams drawn in the sand. These concepts were then incorporated into the emerging field of algebra by scholars in the Islamic world, creating a powerful new mathematical toolkit. Astronomical charts from China, with their precise recordings of celestial movements, could be compared with star maps from Persia and Greece, leading to more accurate calendars and navigational aids. This was the true power of the Caravanserai as an intellectual hub. It was a place for synthesis. It wasn't just a passive relay point for knowledge. It was a workshop where different intellectual traditions were brought together, combined, and forged into something new and more powerful than the sum of their parts. The safe, collaborative environment turned these way stations into the research and development labs of the ancient world, where the collective genius of humanity could coalesce and advance. Walk through the ruins of a caravanserai today, and even in their silent, crumbling state, the walls seem to whisper stories of incredible artistry. Look closely at a surviving archway, and you might see a mosaic where a distinctly Persian vine, with its elegant, swirling tendrils and geometric precision, intertwines with the mythical, serpentine body of a Chinese dragon. This wasn't a random hodgepodge of styles. It was a deliberate and beautiful new visual language, born from the unique conditions of the Silk Road. These structures were not just decorated, they were living galleries, their very surfaces serving as a dialogue between distant cultures. A Turkish architect might have designed the overall structure, but the intricate tilework could have been laid by a craftsman from Isfahan, while the wooden doors were carved by an artisan from Kashmir using motifs he'd seen on a Greek vase months earlier. The Caravanserai itself became the ultimate collaborative art project, a physical manifesto of the cosmopolitan spirit that thrived within its walls. This cross-pollination of artistic ideas happened organically, driven by the very people who stopped there. Traveling artisans were a common sight in any caravan. A painter from Syria might be journeying to a new patron in Samarkand, carrying his pigments and brushes. A master calligrapher from Baghdad could be seeking work in India. During the enforced rest of a caravanserai stay, these artists would naturally gravitate towards one another. They would share techniques, show off their sketchbooks, and even collaborate on small projects, perhaps decorating a merchant's chest or creating a small fresco on a courtyard wall in exchange for lodging. It was in these informal, creative huddles that revolutionary new styles were born. The most famous example is the Gandhara art movement, which emerged in what is now northern Pakistan and Afghanistan. Here, for the first time, artists began to depict the Buddha in human form, but they didn't draw from existing Indian art, which often used symbols like a footprint or an empty throne to represent the enlightened one. Instead, they looked to the classical Greek and Roman sculptures that had been introduced to the region centuries earlier by Alexander the Great. The result was breathtaking. Serene, compassionate Buddha statues with the realistic, muscular anatomy of a Greek god, draped in robes that fell in soft, stone-carved folds reminiscent of a Roman toga. This fusion of Hellenistic realism with Buddhist spirituality created an entirely new aesthetic that would then travel east, profoundly influencing how the Buddha was represented all across China, Korea, and Japan. The influence didn't stop at grand sculpture or architecture. It filtered down into the very objects that were bought and sold in the Caravanserai's courtyard. A Persian potter might see a beautiful piece of blue and white Chinese porcelain unloaded from a camel and be inspired to imitate the technique, but he wouldn't simply copy it. He would adapt it using the fine white clay of his own region and painting it with the cobalt blues available to him, but perhaps adorning it with the floral patterns and Arabic calligraphy characteristic of his own Persian heritage. The result was something entirely new, a Sino-Islamic ceramic that was highly prized from Venice to Beijing. The same process happened with textiles. A Byzantine silk weaver might incorporate a Central Asian animal motif into a design destined for a European cathedral, while a carpet maker in Anatolia could begin using a new crimson dye from India, changing the entire color palette of his region's most famous exports. As art historian Sheila Blair has emphasized, these way stations were more than just hubs, they were catalysts. They provided the neutral ground where aesthetics could detach from their cultural origins and recombine into fresh, hybrid forms that were greater than the sum of their parts. This artistic legacy shows us that the Silk Road was not just a conduit for exchanging finished goods, but a vibrant workshop where beauty itself was constantly being reinvented through collaboration and mutual inspiration. Step into the courtyard of a bustling caravanserai at the height of the trading season, and the first thing that would strike you wouldn't be the smell of spices or the sight of exotic goods, it would be the sound. A roaring, vibrant cacophony of dozens of different languages all being spoken at once. A Chinese merchant barking numbers to his assistant, an Arab trader negotiating with a handshake and a flurry of poetic phrases, a Turkish caravan leader shouting orders to his drivers in a staccato rhythm, all while a group of Sogdian musicians tuned their instruments in the corner. In this deafening Tower of Babel, how did anyone understand each other? How did they strike deals, form partnerships, or even just ask for a cup of water? The answer is one of the Silk Road's most fascinating and enduring legacies, the spontaneous, practical, and brilliant birth of new languages. This was a world without phrasebooks or digital translators, where the sheer necessity of communication forged incredible linguistic innovations right on the spot. Out of this beautiful chaos, a remarkable process of simplification began. When a Persian trader needed to convey the price of his carpets to a Greek buyer who didn't speak a word of his language, complex grammar was the first thing to be abandoned. They didn't need to conjugate verbs perfectly or master the subjunctive mood. They needed to be understood. What emerged were stripped-down, functional forms of speech known as pidgins. These were not full languages in their own right yet, but rather ingenious communication systems built on a foundation of core vocabulary. They took the most essential nouns, words for numbers, goods, directions, and basic needs from the various languages present, and mixed them together with a drastically simplified grammar, often just putting words in the order that made the most immediate sense. A phrase like, "I will give you 5 silver coins for that bolt of silk tomorrow," might become a much more direct, "Me give 5 silver, you give silk next son." It wasn't elegant, but it was effective. It got the deal done, and in the fertile social environment of the Caravanserai, where people stayed for days and formed temporary communities, these pidgins were the daily currency of conversation. Over time, and with constant use along the entire length of the trade routes, some of these pidgins evolved. When a pidgin becomes the first language of a new generation of children, those growing up in the multilingual families of trading outposts, it undergoes an incredible transformation. It gains complexity, a stable grammar, and a full vocabulary capable of expressing not just commerce, but emotion, poetry, and culture. This new, born language is called a Creole. But on the Silk Road, the even more common outcome was the rise of a lingua franca. This is a language that is adopted as a common tongue between speakers whose native languages are different. For vast stretches of the Silk Road, that language was Sogdian. The Sogdians, based in what is now Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, were the master merchants and networkers of the ancient world, and their language became the default for trade from China to the Byzantine Empire for centuries. Later, as political power shifted, Persian took over this role, becoming the language of diplomacy, poetry, and commerce across a huge region. As linguist Nicholas Osler has explored, these languages didn't spread through conquest alone, they spread because they were useful. They were the keys that unlocked communication across cultures. The influence of this linguistic melting pot is still hidden in plain sight within our modern languages. The English word Czech, for instance, likely comes from the Persian word Shah, meaning king, a reference to the phrase Shah mat, or the king is helpless, which became checkmate in the game of chess, a game that itself traveled the Silk Road. The word sugar has roots in Sanskrit shakara, which moved into Persian shakar, then Arabic sakar, before finally entering European languages. This was not a one-way street. The constant interaction meant that words, and even grammatical structures, flowed in all directions. A single commercial transaction could introduce a new word into multiple languages simultaneously, each one adapting it to their own sound system. This created a hidden web of shared vocabulary that belied the vast geographical distances between cultures. It was a tangible record of contact, a linguistic fossil preserved in the everyday words people used. Beyond the mere exchange of words, this process fostered something much deeper, a nascent sense of shared identity. A Turkish trader and a Chinese merchant might have come from utterly different worlds, but if they both conducted their business in a shared Persian lingua franca, they were, in that moment, participants in the same culture. They shared a medium for jokes, for building trust, for expressing frustration, and for forming the human connections that are the bedrock of any relationship. This shared language created an in-group, a community of those who were part of the Silk Road world. It signaled that you were a player in a vast, interconnected system, a citizen of a world without borders. The ability to communicate, however basically, broke down the primal fear of the other and replaced it with the recognition of a common goal, mutual profit and survival. This linguistic legacy proves that the Caravanserai was more than a market or a hotel. It was a crucible where new forms of human connection were literally being spoken into existence, setting the stage for another universal language that would bring people together, the language of food. Now picture the scene as the sun dipped below the horizon and the business of the day began to wind down. The scent of wood smoke and sizzling fat would begin to waft through the Caravansarai, signaling the day's most universally appreciated ritual, the shared evening meal. This was where the most intimate and enduring form of cultural exchange took place, not in ledgers or scholarly debates, but around communal pots and open fires. The kitchen area, often a bustling, open-air space at the edge of the courtyard, became a living laboratory for culinary experimentation. A cook from Persia might hand a precious pinch of saffron to a fellow from Byzantium, showing him how the crimson threads could transform a simple pot of rice into a golden, aromatic masterpiece. A Chinese traveler craving the comfort of noodles could demonstrate how to pull and stretch wheat dough into long, thin strands, while a local vendor looked on with fascination, perhaps adapting the technique to the grains available in his own region. In these moments, the Silk Road was no longer an abstract network of trade routes. It was a tangible, delicious reality simmering in a dozen different pots. The ingredients themselves were global travelers, and the Caravanserai was their immigration checkpoint. Consider the humble noodle. While the exact origins of pasta are a matter of passionate debate, many food historians point to evidence that a form of noodle was being consumed in China thousands of years ago. The theory, supported by scholars like food historian Paul Friedman, suggests that this concept likely traveled westward, perhaps carried by Mongol horsemen or Arab traders who encountered it in Central Asia. It wasn't that a finished product was transported, but rather the brilliant idea itself that a simple paste of flour and water could be dried, stored for incredibly long journeys, and then boiled into a hearty, satisfying meal. This idea then encountered the durum wheat of the Middle East and the Mediterranean, and local chefs adapted it, creating the myriad pasta shapes that would later become synonymous with Italian cuisine. The Caravanserai provided the essential pause where this knowledge could be passed from one culture to the next, demonstrated, tasted, and perfected. The same incredible journey applies to countless other staples. Kebabs, today claimed by many cultures from Turkey to India, are a perfect example of a culinary concept that evolved along the route. The basic technique of cooking meat over an open flame is ancient and universal, but the specific marinades, the combination of spices in the rubs, and the preferred cuts of meat were all subjects of intense discussion and adaptation around Caravanserai fires. A spice merchant from India might introduce a new blend featuring turmeric and cumin to a grill master from Armenia, who would then use it on his own local lamb, creating an entirely new flavor profile that he would then carry further west. Even the ingredients for these spices were on the move. Black pepper, native to India, became a coveted luxury in Rome. Cinnamon from Sri Lanka and nutmeg from the Spice Islands in modern-day Indonesia found their way into the stews and wines of medieval Europe, their value so immense they were often worth their weight in gold. The Caravanserai was the critical linchpin in this chain, the place where these expensive, exotic commodities were measured, sold, and most importantly, taught how to be used. This was not a one-way street of influence. The movement of people and goods meant that fruits, vegetables, and grains began to migrate and take root in new soils. Citrus fruits from Southeast Asia, like lemons and oranges, were carried to the Middle East and eventually to Europe, forever altering regional cuisines. Spinach, believed to have originated in Persia, was introduced to China and became a staple there. Sugar cane, first domesticated in New Guinea, was processed in India, and then its cultivation techniques spread throughout the Islamic world before reaching Europe. The Caravanserai was the hub where seeds were exchanged, cultivation tips were shared between farmers from different continents, and the very agricultural landscape of the world was slowly, deliciously reshaped. A merchant might taste a remarkable melon in Samarkand and decide to carry its seeds with him to try planting them back home, effectively conducting a centuries-long, decentralized experiment in global agriculture. The result of all this exchange was the world's first fusion cuisines, born out of necessity and curiosity. The pilafs of Central Asia combine Persian rice cooking techniques with local fats and spices. The rich, spice-laden stews of North Africa, known as tagines, showcase a blend of Berber traditions with Arab spice routes and Andalusian refinement. Every shared meal was a testament to this blending. A single dish served in a caravanserai might feature Chinese noodles, Indian pepper, Persian saffron, and locally sourced mutton, creating a flavor that was entirely unique to that moment and that specific gathering of people. This was globalization on a plate, centuries before the term was ever coined. It reminds us that some of the most profound and lasting human connections are forged not through treaties or trade agreements, but through the universal, shared joy of discovering a new flavor, of breaking bread with a stranger, and of realizing that a great meal, like a great idea, knows no borders. This constant experimentation with food and flavor was just one part of a much larger ecosystem of practical innovation, where the need to improve the journey itself sparked technological revolutions that would change the world. Beyond the exchange of spices and stories, some of the most transformative cargo carried along the Silk Road was not a physical good at all, but a powerful idea, a new way of doing something that could revolutionize an entire society. Imagine a quiet corner of a caravanserai courtyard, where a traveler from China, having carefully unwrapped a delicate object from layers of protective cloth, begins demonstrating its principle to a captivated circle of scholars from Baghdad. The device is a south-pointing chariot, an early mechanical compass that, no matter how you turned it, always indicated the same direction. For merchants and navigators accustomed to relying on the stars or familiar landmarks in the vast, featureless deserts, this was nothing short of magical. This was the reality of technological diffusion, and the Caravanserai was its premier exhibition hall and workshop. It was in these spontaneous, hands-on demonstrations that abstract concepts became tangible tools, and where the brilliant innovations of one culture were gifted to the world. The transfer of papermaking is perhaps the most iconic example of this process. For centuries, the Chinese had guarded the secret of turning mulberry bark, hemp, and rags into a versatile, affordable writing surface, paper. But secrets are difficult to keep on a road built on openness. Historians believe the knowledge was likely acquired by Islamic artisans after the Battle of Tollas in 751, where Chinese papermakers were taken prisoner. But it was the subsequent journey of this technology that truly matters. The knowledge didn't just stop, it traveled west, carried by traders and scholars who stopped at Caravanserais. In these hubs, the basic Chinese technique was not merely copied, it was collaboratively improved. Arab inventors began experimenting with new materials like linen and flax, developing more efficient production methods, including the use of water-powered mills to pulp the fibers. This adapted, superior papermaking technology then moved through the network of way stations into North Africa and finally into Europe, where it would eventually fuel the Renaissance and the scientific revolution by making books and knowledge exponentially more affordable and widespread than parchment or papyrus ever could. This pattern of adaptation was the rule, not the exception. The architectural concept of the squinch, a clever way of transitioning from a square room to a circular dome, was refined in Persian architecture. This innovation allowed for the construction of larger, more stable domes that could crown grand mosques and palaces. As this knowledge moved westward through the Caravansarai network, Byzantine architects encountered it, admired it, and then put their own spin on it. They developed the pendentive, an even more sophisticated structural solution that allowed for taller, more monumental domes, exemplified by the breathtaking Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. This was not simple imitation. It was a creative dialogue across continents, facilitated by the shared space of the Caravanserai, where builders could sketch ideas in the dust and debate the merits of different engineering approaches. The historian of technology Arnold Pacey describes these spaces as open-source workshops long before the term existed, where practical knowledge was a living, evolving thing, improved by every culture that touched it. The impact of this collaborative tinkering accelerated progress in nearly every field of human endeavor. In medicine, surgical techniques and herbal remedies described in Greek texts were combined with diagnostic methods from Ayurvedic practice and pharmaceutical knowledge from the Islamic world, creating more holistic and effective medical traditions. In agriculture, the noria, or water-raising wheel, likely originated in the Roman world but was dramatically improved upon by Iranian engineers who increased its size and efficiency. This improved design then spread east and west, revolutionizing irrigation and enabling agriculture to flourish in previously arid regions. The Caravanserai served as the meeting point where a farmer from one region could see a model of this new technology, understand its principle, and carry the idea home to his own village. This was how innovation moved at the speed of a camel caravan, not instantly, but with a profound and lasting impact, each adaptation making a technology more versatile, more accessible, and better suited to meet the diverse needs of a connected world. Within the protective walls of a caravanserai, as night fell and the last deals were struck, something remarkable happened. A miniature society spontaneously organized itself. This wasn't a lawless free-for-all. It was a masterclass in self-governance among complete strangers, people who hours earlier had been isolated travelers from vastly different cultures, speaking different languages and worshipping different gods, now had to figure out how to share limited resources like water, secure their animals, and ensure everyone's safety until morning. Out of this necessity emerged unwritten but deeply understood codes of conduct. The best sleeping spots might be allocated by order of arrival. Disputes over trading space were mediated by respected elders within the caravan, and everyone took turns keeping watch through the night, understanding that their collective security depended on individual vigilance. These were micro-societies built on the foundational principle of mutual aid, where the shared vulnerability of the journey created a powerful incentive for cooperation over conflict. The norms cultivated in these temporary communities didn't just vanish at sunrise. They rippled outward, gradually influencing the broader legal and social fabric of the regions they connected. The constant movement of merchants who had experienced this culture of fairness and reciprocity created a demand for more formalized protections. The concept of aman, or safe passage for merchants, which became a cornerstone of Islamic law, likely drew from the practical experiences of countless traders who had relied on this unwritten rule within caravanserais to conduct their business. Similarly, the idea of a merchant's right to fair treatment and the enforcement of contracts across cultural lines began to be codified in legal systems from the Byzantine Empire to the Mongol Khanates. These weren't top-down laws imposed by a distant emperor. They were bottom-up innovations born from the repeated, successful interactions of people who had discovered that trust was the most valuable currency of all. The Caravansarai served as a living laboratory where these principles of civil society were tested and proven effective on a daily basis. Sociologist Janet Abu-Lughod saw in these spaces a powerful historical precedent for what we now call cosmopolitanism, the idea that we can belong to a single human community that transcends our local or national identities. The Caravanserai demonstrated that diverse groups didn't need a powerful central authority to force them to cooperate. They could achieve it organically through shared interest and mutual respect. A Persian trader, a Turkish guard, and a Chinese scribe, finding themselves within the same walls, quickly learned that their common need for security, rest, and profit far outweighed their superficial differences. They developed what we might now call social capital, the networks of trust and reciprocity that are essential for any complex society to function. This ability to build trust among strangers was the absolute bedrock of the Silk Road's operation. Without it, the vast distances and valuable cargoes would have made long-distance trade impossibly risky. The Caravanserai was the institution that manufactured this trust, providing the physical and social space where it could be nurtured and reinforced with every successful interaction. This legacy of pragmatic cooperation offers a profoundly relevant lesson for our own globalized and often fragmented world. The challenges we face today, from climate change to pandemics to economic interdependence, require exactly the kind of cross-cultural collaboration that the Caravanserai perfected centuries ago. These ancient way stations stand as a testament to humanity's enduring capacity to find common ground, to create rules for fair play among diverse actors, and to build communities based not on blood or belief, but on shared purpose and mutual benefit. They prove that cooperation is not a naive ideal, but a practical necessity and a powerful engine for human progress. The social innovations quietly perfected within those dusty courtyards continue to echo in our modern concepts of international law, humanitarian aid, and global civil society, reminding us that the most enduring structures are not always made of stone, but are woven from the fragile yet resilient threads of human trust. Yet even as the caravanserais flourished, a quiet revolution was beginning far from the dusty overland, routes a transformation that would ultimately render these magnificent way stations obsolete. The real change began not with a sudden collapse, but with a gentle lapping of waves against wooden hulls in distant ports. By the 15th century, European navigators were making breathtaking advances in shipbuilding and navigation, crafting vessels sturdy enough to brave the open oceans. These new maritime routes offered something the Silk Road never could: direct access to the riches of the East without the endless intermediaries, the grueling terrain, or the unpredictable tariffs of dozens of different regions. A merchant in Lisbon could now send a ship around the Cape of Good Hope to India and beyond, bypassing the entire overland network that had been the lifeblood of Eurasia for centuries. The economics were undeniable. A single ship could carry the cargo of hundreds of camels at a fraction of the cost and in a fraction of the time. This was not a sudden death, but a slow, inexorable draining of commercial life as the flow of wealth began to chart a new course across the world's oceans. This maritime revolution was powerfully accelerated by profound political earthquakes that shook the foundations of the ancient trading world. The Mongol invasions of the 13th century, while initially creating a period of remarkable stability known as the Pax Mongolica, ultimately sowed the seeds of disruption by redrawing political maps and destabilizing long-standing regional powers. Later, the rise of large, centralized empires like the Ottoman Empire in the west and the Ming dynasty in the east introduced new barriers. The Ottomans, after conquering Constantinople in 1453, controlled key choke points of the overland routes and were not always friendly to European trade interests, leading to increased tariffs and political friction. Simultaneously, the Ming dynasty's turn inward and its abandonment of large-scale maritime exploration under the Yongle Emperor further constricted the flow of goods and people. The old Silk Road, which had thrived on a patchwork of small states and loose confederations, began to fracture under the weight of these new, powerful, and often insular political entities that prioritized control over open exchange. The result was a haunting, gradual silence, where once the air had been thick with the calls of merchants, the braying of camels, and the clang of the blacksmith's hammer. Now only the wind whistled through crumbling archways. One by one, the great Caravansaris were abandoned. Their roofs, no longer maintained, caved in. Their sturdy walls were scavenged for stone by local villagers. The intricate tilework was buried by dust and sand, and the bustling courtyards were reclaimed by the desert. The world was moving on, finding new centers of gravity in coastal port cities like Lisbon, Amsterdam, and later, London. As economic historian Kevin O'Rourke has highlighted, this monumental shift from land to sea didn't just change how goods moved, it fundamentally altered how cultures interacted. The new sea-based networks created different patterns of connection, favoring coastal powers and creating a new global order where influence was projected by naval might rather than by the slow, patient work of overland caravans. The Caravanserai, a symbol of a connected, multipolar world, was being replaced by the colonial port, a symbol of centralized maritime empires. But the story doesn't end with abandonment and ruin. The legacy of these way stations was far too deeply woven into the fabric of history to simply vanish. The knowledge they helped spread, the cultural blends they catalyzed, and the very model of hospitality they perfected lived on. They persisted in the memories of the merchants whose families had grown rich from the trade, in the stories told by poets and writers who romanticized the age of travel, and in the administrative records of the empires that had once funded them. They became places of local legend, their names and locations whispered in folk tales, waiting patiently for a future generation to recognize their immense historical value and begin the painstaking work of bringing them back from the brink of oblivion. For centuries, the great Caravanserai sat in silent ruin, their stories buried under sand and the relentless march of time, until a renewed global passion for cultural heritage sparked a remarkable era of rediscovery. This isn't just about archaeology, it's a race against time to rescue these physical embodiments of human connection before they fade away entirely. Modern teams of experts, armed with ground-penetrating radar, drones for aerial mapping, and delicate hand tools, now work at sites across the ancient Silk Road, meticulously peeling back the layers of history. Each fragment they uncover, a shard of pottery with a unique glaze, a coin minted in a far-off empire, a worn-down stone bearing the inscription of a long-forgotten merchant, is like a puzzle piece. When assembled, these pieces tell a powerful story not just of trade, but of the countless individual lives that intersected within these walls, allowing us to virtually reconstruct the vibrant human tapestry that once made these places so alive. This crucial work has gained immense momentum through the formal recognition and support of global organizations, most notably UNESCO. The act of inscribing a Caravanserai, like Iran's magnificent Casa-i-Bahram or the Seljuk Caravansaris on the route from Turkey to Iran, onto the World Heritage List is transformative. This designation is far more than a prestigious title. It serves as a powerful global alarm bell, signaling that a site is of outstanding value to all humanity and urgently needs protection. This status helps unlock international funding, attracts world-class conservation expertise, and creates a framework for sustainable management that balances preservation with public access. It elevates these structures from being relics of national history to being recognized as foundational monuments in the story of human globalization, worthy of a collective global effort to ensure they stand for centuries to come. Perhaps the most heartening aspect of this modern preservation movement is the central role now played by local communities. After decades, or even centuries, of viewing these ruins as simply part of the landscape, local people are increasingly seeing them as a source of immense pride and a key to their future. Community-led initiatives are flourishing, where elders share oral histories that provide context no archaeological dig can uncover, and younger generations participate in cleanup and awareness campaigns. This shift is often driven by the tangible benefits of cultural tourism. A restored caravanserai can become a catalyst for local economic development, creating jobs as tour guides, in hospitality, and in the sale of local crafts and foods. This transforms the site from a passive historical artifact into an active part of the community's present and future, ensuring that those who live in its shadow become its most passionate and effective guardians. The philosophy guiding the best of this work, as championed by conservation architects like Mehdi Konsari, moves beyond mere physical restoration. The goal is not to create a sterile, perfect replica that feels frozen in time, but to practice what is known as authentic conservation. This means carefully stabilizing structures to prevent further collapse while honestly showing the passage of time, allowing visitors to see the original stonework alongside the necessary but distinguishable new repairs. The objective is to preserve the Caravanserai spirit and atmosphere, to allow a modern visitor to stand in that courtyard and still feel the echoes of the past. This approach acknowledges that we are saving more than just stone and mortar. We are actively keeping alive the very values these structures embodied, the ideals of open exchange, safe refuge, and the profound tolerance that emerged when diverse peoples met as equals on neutral ground. This painstaking work to preserve the past is now inspiring a new generation of architects and designers to look to the Caravanserai for lessons in building a more connected and humane future. Walk into the lobby of any modern hostel or a boutique hotel with a conscious design ethos, and you might be standing in the direct evolutionary descendant of a 2,000-year-old Caravansarai courtyard. That open, airy space, buzzing with travelers from every corner of the globe checking their phones, sharing stories over coffee, or planning the day's adventures, this is the modern echo of that ancient communal hub. The core architectural philosophy is strikingly similar. A central, welcoming area designed for gathering, surrounded by private spaces for retreat and recovery. Just as a weary Silk Road merchant would have found a secure room off the main courtyard, a modern traveler expects a clean, safe place to sleep. And just as that merchant would then step out to mingle, share news, and find companionship, today's guest seeks connection in common areas, whether it's a rooftop bar, a shared kitchen, or a cozy lounge. This isn't a coincidence, it's the enduring legacy of a design perfected for the most basic human needs of a traveler: security, rest, and the fundamental desire for community after a long journey. This lineage extends far beyond mere layout into the very ethical foundation of the hospitality industry. The concept of offering sanctuary to a stranger, of treating a guest with reverence and respect, is an ancient duty sacred to cultures from the Bedouin tribes of Arabia, with their powerful code of Diafa, to the ancient Greeks and their belief in Xenia, the sacred rule of hospitality enforced by Zeus himself. The Caravanserai didn't invent this idea, but it industrialized it. It took this sacred, personal duty and scaled it into a reliable, systematic service available to anyone, regardless of their origin or creed. This transformation from a personal moral obligation to a professional, standardized expectation is perhaps the Caravanserai's greatest gift to the modern world. It established the precedent that offering safe and welcoming lodging was not just a kindness, but a viable and essential economic function, creating a blueprint that would eventually evolve into the entire global tourism and service sector as we know it today. Industry thinkers like Conrad Lashley have pointed out that the Caravanserai model was, in essence, the world's first truly inclusive lodging practice. Its very purpose demanded that it be open to all who arrived, fostering an environment where a person's value was based on their role as a traveler, not their nationality, language, or social status. This radical inclusivity prefigured the core principle of modern hospitality, where the goal is to make every guest from every background feel equally welcome and valued. The focus on creating a neutral, comfortable ground for diverse individuals is now the gold standard for hotels, resorts, and hostels worldwide. We see this in the international staff hired by global chains, the multilingual signage in airports and lobbies, and the conscious effort to cater to a variety of cultural tastes in cuisine and amenities. The Caravanserai proved that diversity wasn't an obstacle to be managed, but the very source of a lodging place's energy and success. The echoes are also profoundly practical. Consider the modern hotel's emphasis on security: the keycard access, the 24-hour front desk, the secure luggage storage. These are direct descendants of the Caravanserai's heavy gates, night watchmen, and guarded storage rooms that kept merchants' goods safe. The concept of all-inclusive service, where a guest can find everything they need: food, water, shelter, and even entertainment without leaving the premises, is a 1,000-year-old idea perfected in these way stations. Even the modern business center or co-working space in a hotel has its roots in the Caravanserai's role as a commercial hub, a place where deals were struck and partnerships were formed. The architecture and services have been updated with technology and luxury, but the underlying human needs they address are timeless. We are still building Caravansarais. We just line them with Ethernet ports and stock the minibars with sparkling water instead of relying on central cisterns and communal fires. Yet the intention to provide a comprehensive haven for the traveler remains utterly unchanged. This enduring influence challenges the notion that our modern world is entirely new. It reminds us that some of our most sophisticated systems are built upon ancient, time-tested foundations. The next time you drop your bag in a hotel room, pause for a moment to appreciate the deep history embedded in that simple act of refuge. You are participating in a ritual of rest and connection that has been refined over millennia, a direct beneficiary of the bold innovation that once lined the Silk Road. This seamless blend of comfort, security, and social opportunity we now take for granted was once a revolutionary concept, and its continued success offers a powerful lesson in designing spaces that don't just house people, but truly bring them together. What if the greatest innovation of the ancient Caravanserai wasn't its architecture, but its social technology, a proven model for building peace that our modern world desperately needs to rediscover? The genius of these way stations lay in their ability to force proximity among people who might otherwise see each other only as distant threats or stereotypes. They created what sociologists now call contact theory in practice, the idea that under the right conditions, direct personal interaction between different groups is one of the most effective ways to reduce prejudice and dissolve misunderstanding. This wasn't a theoretical exercise, it was a daily reality where a Persian scholar, a Mongolian herder, and a Byzantine merchant had to negotiate for space at the fire, share water from the same well, and rely on each other for safety through the night. That enforced cooperation built a fragile but powerful thing, trust, and from that trust grew the possibility of everything else: trade, intellectual exchange, and even lasting peace. In our era of digital echo chambers and polarized politics, where it's easier than ever to dehumanize those we disagree with, the Caravanserai offers a timeless lesson. There is no substitute for shared experience in neutral territory. This ancient blueprint is precisely what informs the most forward-thinking approaches to modern cultural diplomacy. While government-to-government negotiations will always be crucial for treaties and trade deals, they often operate at a high level of abstraction, far removed from the lived realities of ordinary people. This is where the Caravansarai model of informal, people-to-people connection becomes so vital. Initiatives like international student exchange programs, sister city projects, or cross-border scientific collaborations function as modern-day way stations. They create structured yet neutral environments where young future leaders from conflicting regions can live and study together, not as representatives of their governments, but as individuals. An Israeli and a Palestinian student meeting in a university dormitory in a third country, or Serbian and Albanian artists collaborating on a joint exhibition, are participating in the same kind of trust-building that once happened in those dusty courtyards. The goal isn't to paper over differences with platitudes, but to foster the kind of genuine personal relationships that make it much harder to later see the other as a monolithic enemy. This work operates on a longer timeline than traditional diplomacy, investing in the human infrastructure of peace rather than just its political superstructure. Theorists of international relations like Joseph Nye have long argued for the critical importance of this soft power, the ability to shape the preferences of others through attraction and persuasion rather than coercion or payment. The Caravanserai was in essence a factory for soft power. The experience of fair dealing, safe passage, and respectful coexistence within its walls built a positive reputation for entire cultures and empires, making others more inclined to engage with them peacefully in the future. Today, a nation's most valuable export might not be its goods, but its ideas, its educational systems, its art, and its culture. When a country invests in welcoming international students, funding cultural institutes abroad, or supporting scientific partnerships, it is building a reservoir of goodwill and influence that can endure long after political administrations change. This isn't about propaganda, it's about authentic connection. It's the difference between a government issuing a statement and 1,000 individual friendships forming across borders, each one a small but resilient thread in the fabric of international understanding. The urgency of applying this ancient wisdom is palpable in a world grappling with complex, transnational challenges that no single nation can solve alone. Climate change, pandemics, cybersecurity threats, and mass migration, these are the modern equivalents of the bandits and sandstorms that threatened ancient caravans. They demand a level of global cooperation that is impossible without a foundation of mutual trust and shared purpose. The Caravanserai ethos teaches us that we must intentionally design the physical and social spaces where this cooperation can occur. This could mean supporting neutral international organizations that facilitate scientific collaboration on climate data, or creating more formal platforms for city mayors from around the world to share best practices on integrating refugees. It means recognizing that the infrastructure of connection, from visa policies that allow people to move freely to digital platforms that enable cross-cultural dialogue, is not a peripheral concern, but a central strategic priority for peace and prosperity in the 21st century. By looking back at these ancient hubs of exchange, we find a powerfully relevant vision for how to move forward, not by building taller walls, but by building more reliable bridges. Beyond their stone and mortar, Caravansarais embarked on a second life, one woven from the threads of story and verse, transforming from physical shelters into powerful symbols within the human imagination. In the mystical poetry of Jalaluddin Rumi, the Caravanserai becomes a profound metaphor for the world itself, a temporary stopping place on the soul's journey toward divine union. He writes of it as a mere way station, urging us not to grow too attached to its worldly comforts, for the caravan of life is always moving on. This spiritual interpretation elevated the Caravanserai from a simple building to a cosmic concept, a place of rest and reflection within the vast, arid desert of earthly existence. It was a symbol that resonated deeply across cultures, capturing the universal human condition of being a traveler on a larger, often mysterious path. This symbolic weight made Caravansarais the perfect setting for some of the most enduring tales in global folklore, particularly within the intricate narrative layers of the Arabian Nights. Here, within these imagined courtyards, fateful encounters unfold that alter the course of destiny. A disguised prince might reveal his true identity. A merchant fleeing his past could stumble upon a life-changing partnership, or a simple conversation between strangers might unlock a long-buried secret. The Caravanserai in these stories is never just a backdrop. It is an active character, a crucible of coincidence and transformation where the linear path of a journey is interrupted by the unpredictable magic of human connection. It represents a pause in the narrative where anything can happen, where the ordinary rules of the outside world are suspended, and new stories are born from the collision of disparate lives. Scholar Dick Davis emphasizes that this recurring literary motif did more than just provide a convenient plot device. It etched the Caravanserai deep into the collective psyche as a cultural touchstone. It came to represent the very ideals that made the Silk Road possible: unconditional hospitality, the shared vulnerability of the journey, and the beautiful, unpredictable blending of destinies. These stories taught listeners and readers that true safety and community could be found not solely within the walls of one's own city, but in the neutral, welcoming space between them. The Caravanserai became an icon of cross-cultural hope, a testament to the idea that humanity's greatest adventures and most important lessons often occur in the in-between places, where we are forced to rely on the kindness of strangers and are open to the transformative power of a chance meeting. This rich symbolic legacy challenges us to see these structures not as ruins frozen in time, but as living ideas. They continue to inspire modern writers and filmmakers who use the concept of a neutral gathering place, a spaceship lounge, a remote tavern, a galactic trading post, to explore the same timeless themes of encounter, respite, and the forging of identity through travel. The Caravanserais' journey from a practical solution for weary merchants to an enduring symbol of our shared human experience proves that its most powerful legacy is not held in its crumbling walls, but in its permanent residence in our stories, reminding us that we are all, ultimately, travelers in need of shelter and connection. While the Caravanserais' social and economic functions were undeniably revolutionary, its true genius might be found in its silent, symbiotic relationship with the harsh environments it inhabited. These structures were masterclasses in sustainable design, conceived long before the term entered our modern lexicon. Picture the construction process. Rather than importing foreign materials at great cost and effort, builders relied almost exclusively on what the local landscape provided. In the rocky highlands of Anatolia, that meant using sturdy, precisely cut stone that blended seamlessly into the mountain slopes. Across the vast deserts of Persia, it was sun-dried mud brick, a material with incredible thermal mass that kept interiors cool under the scorching sun and warm during frigid nights. This wasn't just a practical choice, it was a profound declaration of belonging. The Caravansarai wasn't an alien structure imposed upon the land. It was an extension of the land itself, rising from the earth to offer shelter, and then eventually returning to it, leaving a minimal ecological footprint in its wake. This deep environmental intelligence extended to every aspect of its operation, particularly in the brutal desert climates where water was more precious than any silk or spice. The most critical system was often hidden beneath the courtyard, vast underground cisterns cleverly designed to collect and store every precious drop of seasonal rainwater. These weren't simple holes in the ground. They were marvels of hydraulic engineering, often lined with a special waterproof plaster and covered with domed roofs to prevent evaporation under the desert sun. This stored water wasn't just for people. It sustained the entire caravan, from the merchants and guards down to the camels and horses that made the journey possible. Beyond water management, the Caravanserai employed passive cooling techniques that required no energy beyond a gentle breeze. The most iconic of these was the wind catcher, or badger, a towering chimney-like structure that acted as a natural air conditioning system. It would capture the slightest wind from high above the ground, funnel it down through internal shafts, and direct it across pools of water in the courtyard to cool and humidify the air before circulating it through the arcades and rooms. This created a comfortable microclimate that could be 15 degrees cooler than the blistering heat outside, a life-saving refuge achieved through pure physics and clever design, not consumed power. What makes these ancient techniques so remarkably relevant today is their resilience. These structures were designed to function and thrive entirely off-grid, with no external power or water supply, making them incredibly adaptable to variable and often hostile conditions. In an era of climate change where energy efficiency and resource scarcity are defining challenges of our time, the Caravanserai offers a powerful blueprint. Modern architects are now looking back to these principles, a movement often called biophilic or passive design, which seeks to reintegrate buildings with their natural environments. The use of local, low-emission materials, the strategic placement of windows for cross-ventilation, the incorporation of thermal mass to regulate temperature, and the harvesting of rainwater are all concepts being rediscovered and applied to contemporary sustainable architecture. The Caravanserai stands as a testament to the idea that resilience isn't about dominating our environment with complex technology, but about understanding its rhythms and working in concert with them. Environmental historians like John McNeill argue that this forgotten wisdom represents a vast library of proven solutions to the very problems we face today. For centuries, human societies developed a deep, place-based knowledge of how to live well within their ecological means. The Caravanserai is a perfect artifact of this knowledge, a building that is both a product of its environment and a graceful enhancement of it. It demonstrates that sustainability is not a new invention but a rediscovery of a much older, more harmonious way of building and living. This legacy urges us to look backward as we plan forward, to see traditional knowledge not as obsolete but as an invaluable source of innovation. The past, it turns out, has already done much of the research and development for a sustainable future. We just need to be willing to learn from its quiet, enduring lessons. For too long, the grand narrative of the Silk Road has been dominated by the figures of wealthy male merchants and powerful officials, their stories etched into official records and chronicles. But if we listen closely to the whispers echoing from the Caravansarai ruins, we can hear a far more diverse and fascinating chorus of voices. The reality is that these way stations were teeming with individuals from the margins of history: women, ethnic minorities, servants, and enslaved people whose contributions were absolutely vital to the Silk Road's operation, even if their names were rarely written down. Imagine a Sogdian woman, fluent in several languages, negotiating a deal for her family's textiles with a Chinese official. Picture a local healer from a minority community, her knowledge of regional herbs and remedies sought after by travelers from thousands of miles away. Envision the enslaved cooks preparing vast communal meals, subtly blending culinary traditions from every corner of the known world with every pot they stirred. These are the hidden figures, the essential cogs in the machine of cross-cultural exchange, whose labor and skills made the flow of grand commerce possible. The very structure of caravan travel inadvertently created cracks in rigid social hierarchies, cracks through which women and marginalized groups could sometimes step into unexpected roles. When a merchant patriarch embarked on a journey that could last for years, he often left the management of his business and household to his wife or female relatives. This responsibility provided women with a practical education in finance, negotiation, and logistics. In some cases, rather than remain at home, these women chose to travel themselves, accompanying caravans to oversee their commercial interests directly. Within the unique social ecosystem of the Caravanserai, far from the prying eyes and strict conventions of their home cities, they could operate with a degree of autonomy that would have been unthinkable otherwise. They could engage in trade, settle disputes, and build their own networks of trust across cultural lines. Historian Susan Whitfield's work, piecing together evidence from forgotten legal documents, personal letters found along the route, and travelogues, has begun to illuminate these shadowy figures. She reveals stories of women acting as moneylenders, property owners, and even caravan leaders, their authority recognized within the pragmatic, profit-driven world of the trade route. Beyond commerce, these spaces provided crucial opportunities for cultural mediation, often led by those who existed between worlds. Bilingual children of mixed marriages, often born in trading outposts, became invaluable interpreters and guides. Members of religious or ethnic minorities, accustomed to navigating the customs of a majority culture, developed skills in diplomacy and translation that made them indispensable to smoother transactions. A Jewish merchant from Cairo, for instance, might find common ground more easily with a Nestorian Christian from Persia than with either of their more orthodox brethren, their shared status as cultural outsiders fostering a pragmatic solidarity. The Caravanserai, a world built on the necessity of communication, naturally elevated those who could bridge divides. It was a meritocracy of sorts, where the ability to get a deal done or to solve a problem could temporarily outweigh prejudices based on gender, ethnicity, or social class. Uncovering these stories requires a forensic approach to history, reading between the lines of official texts and paying attention to the material culture left behind. An ornate belt buckle found in a ruin might indicate the presence of a wealthy nomadic woman. The remnants of specific tools could point to female artisans skilled in textile production or pottery. Even the recipes that traveled along the route hint at the silent, domestic labor of women who preserved and adapted culinary knowledge. Acknowledging this rich diversity does more than just add new characters to an old story. It fundamentally transforms our understanding of the Caravanserais' legacy. It shows us that the inclusivity we often celebrate as a modern ideal had historical precedents, however imperfect and fleeting. It reveals that the engine of globalization was not powered solely by elite men, but by a vast collaborative effort that included the wit, resilience, and overlooked labor of the entire human spectrum. This expanded view challenges the simplistic narratives of the past and gives us a more honest, complex, and ultimately more inspiring vision of how our interconnected world was truly built, one interaction at a time by people of all backgrounds. Traveling the length of the Silk Road, one would have encountered not a monotonous chain of identical rest stops, but a breathtaking architectural journey that mirrored the changing landscapes and cultures outside their walls. The universal human need for shelter and security was met with a stunning diversity of design, each caravanserai a unique reflection of its specific location, built from the very bones of the earth it stood upon. In the heart of the Persian Empire, these way stations were often expressions of imperial grandeur and artistic flourish. Constructed from fine-baked brick, their lofty, soaring arches and domed chambers were adorned with dazzlingly intricate tilework in shades of lapis lazuli and turquoise, depicting geometric patterns, elegant calligraphy, and floral motifs that seemed to bring a permanent garden into the desert. These were not just forts, they were palaces for the people, designed to awe the traveler and proclaim the sophistication and power of the Persian crown, turning a simple stop for the night into an immersive cultural experience. Venture northwest into the rugged, mountainous terrain of Anatolia, and the character of the Caravansaris shifts dramatically to meet the challenges of the land. Here, under the rule of the Seljuk Turks, builders relied on the region's most abundant resource, stone. These structures were formidable fortresses, built with massive, precisely cut blocks that could withstand both the harsh climate and potential siege. Their design was muscular and imposing, with heavily fortified gates, few windows, and a sense of overwhelming solidity. Yet, even in their defensive power, there was artistry. The portals of Seljuk caravanserais, like the magnificent Sultan Han, are often masterpieces of stone carving, featuring elaborate geometric designs and muqarnas, those stunning, honeycomb-like vaults that create a mesmerizing transition from a square room to a domed ceiling. This blend of raw strength and delicate detail perfectly captures the Seljuk ethos, where martial might and refined artistry existed side by side. Now, imagine journeying further east across the vast, open steppes of Central Asia. Here, the caravanserais often shed much of their ornate decoration in favor of pure, pragmatic functionality. Built by nomadic cultures or local rulers with fewer resources, these way stations were frequently constructed from packed earth, mud brick, or rough-hewn stone. Their layouts were simple and efficient, prioritizing easy defense and shelter from the relentless winds that swept across the plains. The aesthetic was one of austere beauty, where the texture of the materials and the clean lines of the structure provided the only decoration. This was architecture stripped to its essentials, a direct and honest response to an environment that offered little margin for error. The beauty of these caravanserais lay not in intricate tilework, but in their perfect harmony with the stark, majestic landscape that surrounded them, serving as humble yet vital lifelines in an immense and empty world. This incredible regional variation is the key to understanding the true nature of the Silk Road itself. As art historian Yuka Kadoi helps us see, the network was not a monolithic, homogenizing force imposing a single culture along its length. Instead, it was a dynamic tapestry of local global interaction. A caravanserai in China's Xinjiang region might follow the standard courtyard plan but incorporate design elements from Han Chinese architecture, like gently upturned roof eaves or covered walkways. Meanwhile, in the Levant, a way station might repurpose the colossal, rounded arches of a much older Roman frontier fort, literally building upon the layers of history that preceded it. This adaptability is a testament to a deep cultural intelligence. Builders and patrons understood that to be effective, a caravanserai had to feel familiar and secure to a local population while still being functional and welcoming to a global clientele. It had to belong to its place, using local materials and construction techniques that builders knew would perform well in that specific climate, all while serving a universal purpose. This delicate balance between local identity and global function is what makes each regional style so fascinating, offering a powerful lesson in how to build for a connected world without erasing the unique character of individual communities. It's tempting to view the caravanserai through a soft focus lens, imagining them as utopian enclaves where people of all backgrounds lived in perfect harmony under the stars. While the spirit of cooperation was indeed a powerful force, the reality within those walls was far more complex and human. These were not idealized sanctuaries insulated from the problems of their time. They were microcosms of the wider world, reflecting its splendors and its struggles in equal measure. For every story of a lifelong friendship forged between a Chinese merchant and a Persian scholar, there were also tales of tension, sharp business practices, and the stark inequalities that traveled with every caravan. The wealthy silk trader from Constantinople undoubtedly slept in a more comfortable, secure room than the low-paid camel driver from a distant steppe tribe. The historical record, pieced together from merchant accounts, legal disputes, and archaeological finds, shows that theft, deception, and occasional violence were very real risks, much as they are in any crowded, transient place where valuable goods and strangers mix. The Caravanserai's greatest achievement was not that it eliminated human conflict, but that it created a framework of rules and shared interest that managed it well enough for commerce and communication to overwhelmingly flourish despite it. This more nuanced view extends to the very nature of the cultural exchange that defined these way stations. While we rightly celebrate the flow of revolutionary ideas like papermaking and the number zero, the Silk Road was a conduit for absolutely everything, with no filter for what was beneficial or benign. The most devastating example was the unimpeded travel of disease. The same networks that carried silk and spices also provided a highway for epidemics. The outbreak known as the Justinian Plague in the 6th century, and later the Black Death in the 14th, are believed to have spread along these trade routes, carried by fleas on rats that stowed away in bales of cloth and grain. These pandemics killed millions from China to Europe, utterly reshaping societies and economies in their wake. The Caravanserai, as a central node where people and animals from every point on the map congregated, acted as an unwitting amplifier for these tragedies, a stark reminder that connection always carries a latent risk alongside its immense rewards. Even the exchange of ideas wasn't always a polite, academic debate. The Caravansarai courtyard could be a stage for intense and sometimes hostile, religious and philosophical confrontation. While tolerance was often a practical necessity, it was not always a deeply held principle. A Muslim theologian and a Buddhist monk might engage in a heated debate over the nature of the soul, each attempting to win converts from the other's caravan. These discussions, while intellectually fertile, could also lead to friction and misunderstanding, Furthermore, not every idea that spread was a noble one. Prejudices and stereotypes about distant peoples often solidified in these spaces, based on second-hand stories and cultural misunderstandings. A harmful pseudoscientific theory or a dangerous medical practice could gain credibility simply by arriving from a far-off and therefore seemingly exotic land. The historian Valerie Hansen urges us to resist the temptation to romanticize this process, pointing out that the Silk Road was a messy, unpredictable, and often amoral system. It was a powerful engine of change, but it was not inherently a force for good. It simply was. By consciously setting aside these myths, we don't diminish the Caravanserai's legacy, we honor it. We replace a simplistic fairy tale with a far more compelling story of human ingenuity and resilience. We see these structures not as magical peace domes, but as brilliantly designed institutions that succeeded in fostering cooperation despite humanity's all-too-human flaws. They were places where people made a conscious, daily choice to look beyond their differences in pursuit of a common goal, and most of the time, that choice won out over suspicion and conflict. This clear-eyed perspective allows us to appreciate their achievement on a much deeper level. It wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect, but it worked. This honest understanding of their function as real, complex social spaces prepares us to see their most profound impact, how these daily interactions within their walls didn't just move goods, but actively began to reshape how people saw themselves and their place in the world. Within the bustling, multilingual courtyard of a caravanserai, something far more subtle than the trade of goods was taking place, a quiet revolution in how people understood themselves. A merchant from Samarkand, after years of travel, might no longer describe himself solely as a subject of a particular king or a member of a single tribe. Instead, he might begin to see himself as part of a new, emerging community, a citizen of the Silk Road itself. This identity was not based on the soil he was born on, but on the thousands of miles of road he had traveled, the shared risks he had faced with his fellow travelers, and the professional bonds of trust he had forged with people from a dozen different empires. His sense of belonging became layered, a palimpsest of affiliations where his local identity coexisted with this new, expansive sense of global connection. He was a man of his city, but he was also a man of the world, and the Caravanserai was the physical space where that dual identity was validated and reinforced every single night. This environment actively challenged the most rigid and primal human instinct, the division of the world into us and them. When you share a meal, rely on someone for protection against bandits, or successfully negotiate a complex deal with a person whose language you barely speak, those abstract categories begin to crumble. The other transforms from a frightening stereotype into a specific individual with a name, a family, a sense of humor, and a shared desire for safety and profit. The Caravanserai forced this kind of personalization of the stranger on a massive, daily scale. A guard from a nomadic steppe culture might discover that the Byzantine merchant he was hired to protect was just as worried about his daughter's health back home as he was. A Persian cook and a Chinese traveler might bond over the universal language of a delicious meal, finding common ground in the appreciation of a well-spiced stew. These countless micro-interactions created a powerful counter-narrative to the politics of division, proving that a shared human experience could be a far stronger foundation for community than the accident of birthplace. Sociologists like Rogers Brubaker point to these historical patterns as crucial precursors to our modern conversations about global citizenship and fluid identity. Long before the internet or mass migration, the Silk Road was demonstrating that human beings are capable of holding multiple, non-exclusive identities. A person could feel deep loyalty to their hometown, practice a faith that originated in a distant land, and consider themselves part of a professional guild that stretched across continents, all without feeling a sense of contradiction. The Caravanserai was the incubator for this mindset. It was a school for cosmopolitanism, teaching through lived experience that the world was far larger and more diverse than any one village or kingdom, and that this diversity was not a threat, but a source of incredible strength, innovation, and richness. This legacy offers a profoundly valuable historical lens for viewing our own contemporary struggles with migration, diversity, and social cohesion. It reminds us that the feeling of belonging does not have to be a finite resource, something that is diminished when shared with newcomers. Instead, the story of the Caravanserai suggests that belonging can be generative. It can be created anew in the spaces between cultures. The challenge for our societies today is not unlike the one faced in those ancient courtyards: how to design physical and social institutions that facilitate meaningful interaction across difference, that allow for the formation of hybrid identities, and that recognize that a strong community can be built on a foundation of many stories, not just one. The Caravanserai stands as a millennia-old example that it is not only possible, but that it has been done before, and that the results can shape the course of human history for the better. What began as a simple, fortified stop for the night could, over generations, blossom into a thriving, permanent city. This remarkable transformation is one of the most enduring testaments to the Caravanserai's power. It wasn't just about providing rest, it was about creating a gravitational pull, a point around which entire communities could coalesce and grow. Imagine a particularly successful caravanserai, strategically placed at the confluence of two major trade routes or beside a reliable oasis. Initially, it's just an island of safety in a vast emptiness, but soon, the constant flow of people and wealth it generates starts to attract entrepreneurs who see an opportunity. A blacksmith who specializes in repairing caravan equipment might set up a permanent forge just outside the gates, no longer traveling but settling down to serve the endless stream of customers. A savvy farmer from a nearby village might begin bringing his surplus produce to sell directly to the caravans, realizing he can get a better price here than at any local market. This is how the magic started. A temporary market for travelers gradually became a permanent one for everyone. Workshops emerged to craft goods specifically for export, using the raw materials that passed through on the camels. Innkeepers who once managed the Caravanserai's rooms might build larger, more comfortable inns nearby to handle the overflow of prestigious guests. Artisans, money changers, cooks, and entertainers all flocked to this new hub of economic activity, building homes and establishing families. The single point of the Caravanserai began to spawn a satellite settlement, a shanty town of commerce and opportunity that slowly solidified into a proper town with its own streets, walls, and identity. The way station, once the sole destination, had become the bustling heart of something much larger. This organic, bottom-up process of urban development, so brilliantly chronicled by urban historian Spiro Kostov, shows that cities aren't always planned from above by emperors and architects. Sometimes they grow naturally from the most practical of human needs, the need to connect and trade. We can see this legacy etched into the very maps and names of some of the most fabled cities along the Silk Road. Take Bukhara in modern-day Uzbekistan. Its origins are deeply intertwined with its role as a major caravan stop. Its entire urban layout, with a central citadel, a sprawling commercial district, and dense neighborhoods of craftsmen, evolved to service the trade that was its lifeblood. The city didn't just have a caravanserai. In many ways, the city was the caravanserai, grown up and matured. The same is true for Kashgar in China's Xinjiang region. For centuries, its legendary Sunday market was not just a city event. It was a continental event, the culmination of journeys for thousands of merchants. The city's identity and economy were forged entirely by its function as the ultimate caravanserai, the last major stop before caravans embarked on the most treacherous legs of their journey across the Pamir Mountains or the Taklamakan Desert. These were not cities that later became trading posts. They were trading posts that organically evolved into magnificent, world-class cities. This process created a powerful, self-reinforcing cycle of growth. As a settlement grew more prosperous and offered more services, it became an even more attractive destination for merchants, drawing even more traffic and wealth. This increased revenue allowed for the construction of better infrastructure, stronger walls, reliable water systems, larger mosques and bathhouses, which in turn made the city more secure, comfortable, and prestigious. Local rulers, recognizing the source of their wealth, would invest in protecting and promoting the trade routes, ensuring a steady flow of potential new residents and customers. The Caravansarai, the original seed, had now become the engine for a complex urban ecosystem, supporting not just long-distance traders, but also a vast local economy of farmers, artists, scholars, and officials. The distinction between the traveler and the resident blurred, as the city itself became a permanent home for the spirit of exchange that the Caravanserai had always represented. Understanding this incredible journey from waystation to metropolis completely reframes our appreciation for these structures. They were not passive waypoints on a map, they were active agents of civilization, the very kernels from which urban life could sprout in the most unlikely places. They demonstrate the profound interdependence between mobility and settlement, showing that the flow of people and goods is not the opposite of community, but rather its essential precursor. The Caravanserai provided the initial spark of connection, and from that spark, fueled by countless conversations and transactions, grew the enduring fires of city life, culture, and belonging that would light up the world for centuries to come. And so our journey along the ancient Silk Road comes to a close, not at a final destination, but at a place of reflection. We've walked through the imposing gates of these stone sanctuaries, sat by their communal fires, and witnessed the incredible exchange of everything from silk and spices to mathematics and faith. It's a journey that reveals a profound truth. The Caravansarais were far more than just inns or pit stops. They were nothing less than the crucibles of our modern, interconnected world, the very places where human connection was forged across vast divides, sparking innovations that would ultimately shape the course of civilization itself. Think about the world we live in today. The concept of a global economy, the very idea that a product can be designed in one country, manufactured in another, and sold to a consumer halfway around the world, finds its earliest blueprint in the trade networks these waystations supported. The multicultural cities we celebrate, where 100 languages are spoken on a single street, are the direct descendants of those bustling Caravansarai courtyards. Even our scientific and artistic traditions are deeply indebted to the scholars and artisans who met in these neutral spaces, comparing star charts, blending artistic styles, and translating texts that would have otherwise been lost to history. The Caravanserai was the hardware upon which the software of human progress first ran, proving that our greatest advancements have never emerged from isolation, but from the beautiful, messy, and transformative power of open dialogue and shared experience. This legacy is not a relic to be admired from a distance. It is a living, breathing manual for the challenges we face right now. In an era where it's often easier to build walls than bridges, the Caravanserai stands as a timeless testament to the opposite approach. Its lessons in pragmatic sustainability, using local materials, harnessing natural ventilation, and conserving precious water, offer powerful inspiration for architects and planners today. Its model of inclusive community, where a diverse group of strangers could quickly establish rules for cooperation and mutual safety, provides a blueprint for how we might manage our own increasingly diverse societies. The Caravanserai teaches us that trust is not a naive concept, but the most essential infrastructure for any complex human endeavor, from long-distance trade to international diplomacy. So as we leave these ancient way stations behind, let's carry their spirit forward. Let's strive to build more metaphorical caravanserais in our own lives spaces, both physical and digital, where people from different backgrounds can meet as equals, share their stories, and discover common ground. Let's champion the idea that our differences are not a weakness to be tolerated, but an incredible source of strength, innovation, and richness to be celebrated. The next chapter of our human story is still being written, and it will be shaped by the choices we make today. Will we choose isolation and fear, or will we choose connection and curiosity? The silent stone walls of the Caravanserai, having witnessed the best of what we can achieve together, gently urge us toward the latter. They remind us that we are all, and always have been, fellow travelers on a shared journey. If you've enjoyed this exploration into the heart of historical connection, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And for more journeys into the mysteries of our past, be sure to subscribe.